In part 3 of the masterclass, we'll talk about the remote monitoring and benchmarking study that we did for Sustainability Victoria, which yielded many of the results that we are reporting on and are using in the masterclass itself. And the study went through a process of recruiting, first of all, a number of small, medium enterprises using commercial refrigeration systems to study as targets. Then we installed the METIS monitoring systems that I'll explain shortly onto 50 refrigeration units across Victoria. And this was done intentionally diversely, so in regional areas, up in Mildura, in metro areas, and on a range of different units. These systems were also inspected to find any visible faults by a refrigeration technician. They were then monitored with these systems for 6 months, during which faults were detected and auto-detected. And then we analysed the data, and we're now in the phase of reporting on this. So the units that we have here are these METIS monitoring units, are a very weatherproof IoT solution that collects data from any refrigeration system through a range of sensors. And that's a temperature sensor, a temperature and humidity sensor, a pressure sensor, or a current sensor, or a CT as we call that. And by fitting these to compressors and fans and condensers and evaporators, you pretty much know exactly what the refrigeration system is doing, but remotely. And then the system has the capability of auto-detecting certain faults, which then alert you to go and look at them, and then you can have them rectified, have them repaired, and you can report on the results. So these systems are deployable everywhere. We have them in various locations, including these sites, which are still running, by the way. And then service technicians can proactively respond to alerts and schedule calls. You don't have to respond to a breakdown. You can actually predict a failure on a refrigeration system and respond proactively, which is the whole objective. So why would an owner want one of these in any case? Because, well, by ongoing monitoring, you're reducing that unpredictable failure element. You know that the system is running optimally at all times. And as we will show you, most refrigeration systems do not run optimally at all times. By early detecting the faults, you can auto-detect or detect something long before it happens. Most faults take weeks and months to really ultimately cause a failure, and those can be detected much earlier. And you can also avoid doing unnecessary things. It's a refrigeration system, whether it's this big or this big, it's still a complex beast. And there are many things that can happen to it. And if you are confronted with a system that's broken on site, it's hard to then detect the fault. Whereas if you're monitoring it in an ongoing way, you can detect the fault far more easily and accurately and less expensively. So here are examples showing these sensors deployed on refrigeration systems. There we have on the left a photograph of current transducers deployed into a switchboard. In the middle we have temperature sensors, pressure sensors, and more current transducers deployed on the actual compressor. And on the right hand side we see these units located externally so that they have a good signal. So once we did all that, we started analysing the data. The first thing we did is we looked at what could we see on a system, just visual faults. And the most obvious ones are a dirty condenser coil or a dirty evaporator coil. That's easily seen. It's also something I encourage you as a refrigeration owner to regularly look at. And it always surprises me when I walk through a supermarket or a coal store with a client that I had learned that they don't do this regularly. It should be a habit. You should make a habit of looking at your coils ever so often, because more often than not there's a piece of plastic up against it or something. So then other things that you can easily detect are ice buildup. You can, if you knew what you're looking for, you can look at the type of refrigerant and see whether that's a problem. You can look at the insulation, the value of that. You can make sure that people don't put things into the cool rooms that don't belong there. It's quite interesting. We saw quite a few of these cool rooms out there with supermarket trolleys inside them. So they use the cool room to store supermarket trolleys. Why? So that's just a way of increasing your energy use. Door seals, fans that are broken, hot air recirculation, a lot of other things that are not easily, but that can be detected if you know what you're looking for, just by going to the plant and detecting it. Sadly, only half the sites had no defect. So purely on visual examination, 50% of the refrigeration systems out there had at least one defect. Some had two, and there were a few that even had three defects, 3 visual defects. Which is okay, 50% are running fine, that's not so bad. But, okay, so many of them are housekeeping faults. So these are the faults that the owner can address. Some are installation faults, so things that were done wrongly from the outset, like the location of the condenser. There are maintenance issues, dirty coils that haven't been cleaned. And there were simple faults, like fans breaking. So different categories. Some things the owner can attend to himself, and some where he needs to have a tradesperson look at that. However, once you look at monitoring, the story becomes quite different. Monitoring can see things that a casual eye cannot, even a casual trained eye cannot. So it can detect many of the things that a casual walk-by will detect, like ice buildup. You will see ice buildup. You can also detect ice buildup with sensors. But there are many other things that you cannot detect, like the compressor running at an excessively low pressure. You cannot detect that visually. Like the compressor cycling on and off too quickly. The superheat on the evaporator, which is the amount that the gas is excessively heated. You cannot detect that unless you measure. Unnecessary starts of the compressor, which can happen in the middle of the night. You cannot. So there are a whole range of faults that you could, in theory, detect if you were to sit next to the system for 12 hours and watch it and write it all down, but nobody does that. So, but the automatic system can detect those. Now, if we put those faults into perspective, it becomes a bit sad, because only 36% of the sites had no fault. Another 31% had one fault, 26% had 2 faults, and there were a few sites with 3 faults. And as you can see from that list, there are a lot of faults. A refrigeration system is not a light bulb or a pump. There are lots of different things that can go wrong with a refrigeration system. So it is actually quite difficult to diagnose. It's like a human being. There are so many things that go wrong with your body. And the same thing, not quite, but it's sort of a little bit like that. A refrigeration system has a lot of bits and pieces and a lot of things that can be wrong with it. Some of these faults have an energy impact. Some of them have an operational impact, like not getting the temperature control that you want, or using too much power, or reliability. And some of them have both. So here is a show of the spread of impact some of these faults would be having on the refrigeration system, and hence on the business. And we found the best way to display these, or to present the nature of the faults, is with an iceberg diagram. How do we show all these faults that are difficult to see? And an iceberg is really the best representation. So there's a pinnacle of the iceberg, the bit that sticks out of the ocean. That's the stuff that we can see. That's the stuff that I can teach a lay person to find. And these are things like dirty coils and ice buildup and broken fans. Everybody should be able to detect whether something is moving or not. And then there are some faults which a skilled or a trained person, or during routine maintenance, routine quick inspection, should be detectable, like electrical faults, low refrigerant charge, some types of compressor fault. With a bit more effort, you can detect superheat faults. But then there are a whole, big quantum of faults that are really hard to detect. And that's like 70% of the faults are not easy to detect. And talk to any refrigeration technician, he'll confirm that. The worst are the intermittent faults, the faults that happen at 2 a.m. and then you're there at 8 a.m. and the fault is not there, and you try and fix it, and then the guy calls you the next day and says, yeah, you haven't fixed the fault. Because you haven't, because you weren't there at 2 a.m. to see the fault. Now, this system can detect that, and that's the value of it. But unfortunately, it now also exposes us to the reality that on the small commercial refrigeration side, there is this big number of faults which are hard to detect and therefore remain undetected, because it's simply not worth the investment in man hours and the current way we do our business to actually detect all those faults. So we have the issue, the reality, which the study identifies, is that most refrigeration systems out there have issues, and it is just commercially not been viable to detect them, and they are causing an excess of energy use. An example here, another analysis of the data, is looking at the energy consumption of these units. Now, all 50 systems were of a similar size, so you'd expect a similar energy consumption. But if you look at this, you look at the statistical normal distribution around that, yes, there are a lot of sites that use what you'd expect the energy consumption to be, but they're the outliers. They're the units way out there that use way more energy than they should. And these are the faulty units, or the oversized units. You can clearly see that. You can correlate that to the faults. Or if you look at the operating hours, ideally a refrigeration system should turn off and then turn on. It shouldn't be running flat out all the time, and it shouldn't be running for 1 minute an hour either. But if you look at the distribution, you can see some sites, some units that are only running for like an hour a day, which means they're way too big. So they turn on and they pull the temperature down, and then they turn off for another half an hour, and then they turn on and pull the temperature. So they're oversized, which is inefficient. Or you have undersized units, which just run flat out all day, run for 22 hours a day, just trying to keep up. And you can see there are a lot of units like that. They're just struggling to keep up. And that's also not efficient. Again, the number of run cycles per day is another interesting measure. If a system runs for 10 minutes, turns off, runs for 10 minutes, turns off, that's good. But if it runs for 30 seconds and then for 30 seconds, that's not good, because you actually wear out the compressor, you wear out the electrics. So the number of run cycles per day is, as you can see, there's a normal distribution. Ideal would be around 60 run cycles a day, which is like 5 starts an hour. That's fine. Most systems would be dead happy with that. But there are some systems that do 250 starts per day. So they are really grinding it. And again, you can see there's a lot of outliers there that are not well set up, and they keep turning on and off, on and off, on and off. And that'll eventually cause the system to fail. So this monitoring data really tells us a lot about the status of the industry, and tells us that there's a lot of potential. There's energy to be saved, like avoiding ice buildups, evaporator ices. We'll talk about defrosting, which is the opposite of that. You don't want to over defrost, but you don't want to not defrost at all, like this picture is showing you, because your compressor works very hard to try and cool something, but if the evaporator is covered in ice, it doesn't do a great job. Low pump down pressure is a classic example, a common thing. It's really just avoidable, because it can be commissioned properly and you won't get that. But it has an energy efficiency issue, because the compressor is running at this excessively low pressure during run cycles. It's a waste of energy, but it also potentially damages the compressor. And then the short cycling, as I mentioned, the compressor that runs for 10 seconds and turns off every time. Many reasons why that is happening, and it's neither energy efficient nor is it good for the equipment. High superheat, again, a classic adjustment thing, which every refrigeration technician learns at TAFE, but it takes time to do. And if you don't do it properly, you do have you end up with a system that's not running well. Unnecessary starts. This is where a system turns on again between its normal run cycles because something is causing it to do so. Unnecessary runs, energy that you're paying for without getting productive cooling for it. So there's one case study I wish to show, a classic example of a site that actually had 3 faults. So that happens to be a Schnitz, and Schnitz should be applauded for actually fixing the problem quickly once we recognized it. So in this case, there were 3 faults. The unit was a small condensing unit, was doing lots of unnecessary starts. It was running to a very low pump down pressure, and it had a very high suction superheat. So effectively, it wasn't properly set up at all. Whoever installed that, and I hope he's listening, didn't do a great job. So we then looked at the energy consumption, and that system, the way it was running, would have used that much extra energy, and I'll tell you what that translates to in dollars shortly. And it had all the extra starts, which would have worn the system out quite quickly. It would have probably only run for 5 years and burned itself out. So the fix was easy. It needed a bit of additional refrigerant because it wasn't charged properly. The suction superheat needed to be reset, and the HPLP switches, which I showed you on that picture earlier, needed to be readjusted. And what you can see on this graph, which is the raw data, on the left you can see the very low suction pressure at the top, which is at the bottom of the graph, and afterwards it was substantially higher. And you can see the superheat, which was at 35 degrees, and it dropped down to 18 degrees. Now what did that do? So the annual energy savings was about 2,000 kilowatt hours that we calculated afterwards. Cost savings about $500 per annum. We worked out that it had about 5 years of operation left. So the net present saving, considering a 5-year lifespan left, would be about $3,000. The cost of doing that intervention, which was now a targeted intervention because we knew exactly what had to be done, was $700. So it was a worthwhile exercise. You had a 4.5 times return on the cost of the intervention. So it was a good outcome for the client. So yes, we had the fan replacement at PFT Food Storage in Shepparton. Simple fault, one of the fans wasn't working. So there were 2 fans. The lag fan was therefore forced to cycle a lot, and it caused very high discharge pressures or condensing temperatures and an excess energy consumption, and it probably would have caused a failure on the first hot day. Now we detected this fault when we installed the system. They were running fine, and at some point the fault started. And we detected that fault during cool weather, during July, and it was fixed during July. But probably in the last few days that we've had a few hotter weather, the system would have tripped out and it would have failed. So a very simple fix: replace the fan. And that was done, and on the graphs before and after, the change in operation could be clearly seen. The pressure fluctuations were substantially reduced, and also the room temperature control was substantially improved. So it was kind of obvious that there would be an improvement, and it is obvious from the data. So again, we had a good return on the cost. It was a quick repair. It didn't take even an hour to do that. Fan was the major cost, and the client had a good immediate energy outcome, and he would have avoided a future failure. So thank you very much. Sustainability Victoria supports action on climate change and reducing energy costs. If you would like to find out more, please visit the Sustainability Victoria website.